My name is Fred Kelly, and I was born on June 30th, 1943. Actually in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which is a long way from here. My father was stationed there during the war.
And how long did you stay up there? When did you come back to the city?
We were back here before I knew it. My earliest recollections were back in Hopewell, Virginia, where we lived, and my father continued to be in the service. This was during the war, and he was overseas, as they said, until the end of it, 1945. And I lived in City Point with my mother and older sister, waiting for Daddy to come home.
And you were 2 when you came home?
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm.
So you were not involved with the river until you came home?
That's correct. That's correct.
And what are your first memories of associating playing with the river of the river?
Well, my father was an avid canoeist and had grown up in this area as well. And as a boy, he had paddled his canoes also with the Boy Scouts right at Tar Bay, where our cabin is. He was not married to my mother at the time, but the Scouts used to use the farm there as a place to camp. And when he got home from the war, the first thing he did, one of the first things he did, was to buy himself a new canoe, an Old Town canoe from Maine. And I remember the day it came. He was in the yard. It was over top of a couple of barrels being held up there, and he was talking with one of the neighbors, and they were admiring this beautiful green canoe that smelled like cedar. And that was my first introduction to a canoe. And very soon afterwards, we had it here at the cabin, and I was being introduced to what it was like to ride in a canoe at probably age 3.
Oh my goodness, can you remember that?
Well, it's a bit blurred as to whether I was 3 or 4 or whatever, because we started coming down here very, very soon afterwards, because this was my mother's family's cabin, and it was a place of retreat for generations. And so this was a place where we would come on weekends and sometimes for entire weeks. And that's where I was introduced really to the river.
When would you guess the cabin was built?
I don't have to guess. It was in 1916. We had the 100th anniversary last year of it.
And is the cabin on your family farm?
It's on a larger tract of land, it's still in the family, but it is not actually our immediate family so much as what the 6 acres of the family that the cabin actually is on. But it is on the old Ruffin farm. Edmund Ruffin is my great-great-great-grandfather, who was quite famous, and for various reasons. He was the father of modern agriculture and did a lot of agricultural experiments. On Beechwood, which is the farmhouse next to the cabin, still standing today, somewhat.
What year would you say he began modern farming?
He inherited his farm, which was mainly on Coggins Point and further around, probably around 1812 or so.
And I'm still trying to see in my mind, the family's farm, I think you call it, is close to the cabin in Hopewell?
The farm, or in those days it was a plantation, was pretty much all on Tar Bay, and then there was also some land here at what is now called Evelington. It was called Evelington then too, but that house was not there. So they had property on this side as well.
And the Walker's Mill Road, which is where you live now,
Mm-hmm.
is on the plantation?
No, the Walker's Mill Road house is just a house that I bought when I came back from working in Tennessee for a while. It was just happened to be for sale, and I was looking for a place near where I'd grown up, and there it was. So that's where I actually reside now. But that is not really relevant to any of my time here on the James.
So back to the cabin, which I think is the,
Mm-hmm.
is the point.
That's the relevant point. That's the relevant point where I've spent so much time.
So I love the fact that you remember it smelling like cedar. Can you still actually smell that smell?
Oh, whenever I do, it brings me right back to that canoe. You know, sometimes there will be a structure made of cedar, and I can walk past it, and it smells a lot like my father's canoe. So I have that nice association.
And how often did you go out and canoe at the time?
That was something we always did whenever we came down. We came down often, just about every weekend. And my father would take off a week in the summertime, and we would stay down for a week. Home was never too far away, nor was it, he worked for Allied Chemical, which was in Hopewell.
Mm-hmm. And what did you do when you got in the canoe? Did you fish? Did you?
We fished. One of the unique things we did with that canoe is that we sailed it. Not many people sail canoes. Uh-huh. And he had done this as my uncle had. They all had sails for their canoes, and he had one as well. So, of course, the sail often was up on a good day, and it's very exciting to be sailing a canoe without the ballast actually being topside rather than below. That ballast being the passengers.
I was going to say that was you.
Yes, and whoever else was there. One thing about sailing a canoe is that it teaches you the little cues of what's happening with the wind very quickly. You can pick up the signs before the wind actually gets to your sail, which is important.
No, you're ahead of the day. What are some of those clues?
Well, you can see it on the water coming. And the amount of ripple on the water gives you an idea of what the strength of the wind that's coming. And if you're sailing a canoe, it's very important to know what's getting ready to happen, so you can set yourself for it. Remember, the passengers are the ballast.
Above the water line. Well,
Yes, right. Well, you know, we are just the ones that that make compensation for what the sail is trying to do, which is turn you over, actually.
Did you have real sails made for canoes, or were
They were real sails made. It was a sailing rig that attached and was stepped into the canoe.
let's see, how was your mast, I guess, would be the question.
It was a lateen rig, and the mast really wasn't that high, I would say. You know, if you were standing in the boat, which you wouldn't be standing in the boat, it would be about head high for an adult. Right.
And just one sail?
One sail, which could be, the position which could be changed 360 degrees, really. Any place it needed to be for a particular heading.
And I guess the James is pretty wonderful, but I mean, it seems brilliant when you're sailing in a place where there's tide coming in and out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it just makes a great deal of sense. Well, some days more than others, but did you have to tack a lot, or could you actually sail in a straight line on the James? And I know it was
We did a lot of tacking. Actually, we didn't have lee boards at the time. My father didn't have lee boards for his canoe, which meant that it slipped a lot. If you know what slippage is. All right. So we would go sideways almost as fast as we were going forward, which ultimately meant that we had to paddle back in the wind if we weren't careful with the wind in our face. Much later, I got another rig, and which did have the lee boards, and that made all the difference as far as being able to point the canoe properly.
I remember being in a sailboat in the storm when my brother popped
Uh,
out of it. Older.
Time to get the sail down.
That's what I said. It was one of the handful of times when I thought, seriously thought I was going to drown.
Mm-hmm.
In the mountain emotion. So was it mostly the excitement of sailing that you were doing with him? Did you also fish and swim?
We did fish, and my father wasn't so much the fisherman, but he did teach me to fish. We did initially fishing just casting out from the shore, and in those days we caught mainly catfish and perch and the odd eel, which we were never too happy about to see. Well, they were slimy. They had usually swallowed the hook, and they were difficult to release. And so we usually caught them on a low tide when there was really nothing else to do but to cast out.
So I'm not sure I really want to picture this, but the hook didn't catch them in their mouth, so to speak, but went down.
Well, they would swallow it. Eels have a tendency to swallow the hook.
And how did you free them?
We just had to cut the eel, which was again hard to handle. It wasn't a pleasant experience to catch an eel.
And you cut him to get the hook?
To get the hook out, because the hook, we had to cut his head off or something, to get to expose the hook.
And that was kinder, I suppose, than just cutting the line and letting him spend the rest of his time with the hooking.
Probably so. In those days, it was, I'm pretty much an animal rights person today, but I had to grow into that. In the old days, there weren't a lot of animal rights people that were teaching us this, and we pretty much did what had always been done, and that is to not worry about the physical condition of the animals we were catching or shooting.
Still, instinctively, it was an unpleasant thing to do with the eel.
Well, it was simply because the eels, as I remember, they had teeth. They could actually bite you, and they were hard to hold onto, and they had slime on them, which got all over your hands, and often all over the line.
How often was it catch an eel?
I would say, 2 or 3 a summer, something like that.
Did you eat the hook and eat the fish?
Yes, we did. We learned how to, especially the catfish, we learned how to skin the catfish, and we used to fry them.
And was that part of the celebration of the family coming to the cabin, was fishing and eating fish?
That was pretty much something that I did by myself. My parents were happy to have some fish to eat, but as I kind of grew into going down to the river and fishing and doing things that I wanted to, it was just something that I believed that they were not particularly interested in, but they were happy that I was having a good time.
And as you got a little older, and you were more than a passenger in your father's canoe, how did you feel it were?
Pretty much the same as he did, except that I was able to, I acquired the skills to canoe, to sail, and to paddle. Mm-hmm. And he taught me that. And that was one of his greatest gifts to me, was to introduce me to paddling. And it helped me, not only as an activity for myself, which I have to this day, but it helped me somewhat professionally too, because I used to work with teenagers professionally who were court referred to me, and outdoor activities were some of the things that we did in a therapeutic way. So I also taught them how to canoe and some other wilderness skills.
Is this the position in Tennessee?
This was the position in Tennessee, yes.
Who was the umbrella? Who were you working with?
I was working for the local mental health center. It was called Harriet Cohn Mental Health Center at the time.
Was that innovative treatment?
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was considered to be. It was considered to be. I drew that from my activities and knowledge here, as well as other wilderness experiences that I'd had.
And did people, a variety of people, see it as innovative and a breakthrough and successful?
They see it to this day. I'm in touch with my old colleagues there, and they are they think of that particular era when we had that program going as one of the best ones.
Are they not doing it now?
Unfortunately not. You know, it takes someone with those skills and that kind of desire to share them in a therapeutic manner. That combination is rare, and I was just glad to have them. Mm-hmm.
Can I take some breath away? Why would that be rare?
I guess it's because it takes equipment, it takes a lot of energy to do this. It's not done in the office. It's not done in the group homes. It takes a lot of planning. It takes staff training. It wasn't just me, it was my staff as well. So it takes a lot of effort to get these things going, as well as a certain amount of imagination to do it. This is not the only way to work with kids with issues, but it's a very effective way.
It's hard to listen to. 30 years of my life was spent in health service,
I see.
and there are lots of studies that if young children are introduced to the natural world when they are young, say maybe 6 or 7,
Mm-hmm.
they're inclined to be afraid of it and
Mm-hmm.
never want to participate as they get older.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of growing white hair in national parks these days, and a lot of concern of where are the young people?
Mm-hmm.
How can they be encouraged to enjoy this? I hear you saying all these other things that make it difficult, but what a shame that something like that isn't continuing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it has to be done carefully. When you're teaching them to hike, I used to say we're not taking them on a forced march. The idea is to introduce them and to have them have a good time and have a good memory from the beginning. Because as you said, if they have a bad time in the beginning, they never want to try it again. So one of the tricks to using this technique is to make sure that they have a comfortable, enjoyable experience.
Do you do that with young folks here now?
I did that also with the wilderness program that was sponsored by the Episcopal Church back in the 1970s, late 1970s.
It sounds like it doesn't exist.
It may, I'm not sure if it still exists or not. I don't think it exists exactly like that. It was built on an outward bound format. And there again, we were using canoes in whitewater this time, as well as mountaineering and that type of thing.
What is your sense of young children being introduced to enjoying the James now, and how does that work? Do you see it happening?
Oh, I see it happening a lot more, yes. Yes. I'm also associated with the James River Association, and they have programs that introduce teenagers to the river. In fact, my grandson was one of them. You know, now I started him out right here at Tar Bay, about the same age that where I was started, but he also became involved and is still involved with the James River Association programs for youth, a leadership program. And one of their parts of their program is to start off an expedition at the beginning of the James, up near the Cowpasture River, that area, and in 3 stages and with 3 groups come all the way down to the Chesapeake Bay. So yes, this is happening much more than it did when I was coming along at his age. I was just fortunate to have a family that had the cabin on the river and had the canoes there.
And the love of it.
And the love of them, exactly.
It seems clearly that's been a really important thread in your whole life.
Very much so, very much so. And one of the joys has been to see the river, the condition of the river improve over the years. When I was young, it was, I would often come down the hill to the river and see a line of dead fish that had been killed by some spill or something. Because we are just below the chemical capital of the South, otherwise known as Hopewell.
I haven't heard that before.
Mm-hmm. And it was known as the chemical capital of the South. And in those days, they had the procedures to get rid of their waste chemicals directly into the river. One of the places was a place called Bailey's Creek, which is between here and Hopewell. It's an estuary. And we would actually cross that creek to come to our cabin. And it was referred to as Smelly Creek. It was black in color. When I was a teenager, we also water skied. And sometimes we would water ski up near the mouth of that creek. And you could see the line of black and brown from the black water coming out of Bailey's Creek. Bailey's Creek, the good news is that Bailey's Creek has been cleaned up, and I see people fishing in there now, which I never thought I would do. It was a dead creek for years. But this was the kind of thing that was going on. It was what they always did. That's how you got rid of anything you didn't want, is to put it out of sight for a while and hopefully out of mind. But it just about killed the James River.
What are the most important things that changed that?
There was one crowning blow called the Keepone spill, or the Keepone incident, where, again, one of the industries in Hopewell was making Keepone, and I believe it was something like an insect killing agent that did not break down. And for some reason, a lot of it ended up in the river. And once it was found out, that was about the time the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, was coming into force, and they started clamping down on this kind of activity. It actually closed the river down for fishing, for commercial fishing, for a decade or two.
Is it fair to say that the Keepone spill was one of those things that caused such a backlash that it helped folks find the motivation to find some of the protected laws?
It seemed to have been the tipping point, from my recollection. Dan Rather came down and did a report on it. And I remember him standing on the building across the road from the people who were manufacturing this, and making a national scene about it. And there were certain people in Hopewell that never appreciated Dan Rather because of that. But I'm glad he did it.
Who called him down? Who got him
I think it just became a national incident, and he found out about it and decided to come down and report on it. He actually reported on the workers. Apparently, the people who were making it had not informed the workers that how dangerous it was, and they had it all over their clothes and were eating their lunches, with this all over them, and then going home and bringing it home to the families as well. So he interviewed all of those. It was not a pretty situation, but the silver lining was it seemed to be the beginning of some major changes in how the river and our environment was going to be treated.
Often happens that way. Something atrocious enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You think of
You're right.
other things
Right.
that are relevant there.
And when I was younger, and there was a lot of pollutants in the air, and Hopewell actually was known for its rather foul-smelling air. When we would complain about it, the people who worked for the industries would say, "Don't complain about that. That's money you're smelling." And I knew when I was 8 years old that was not money I was smelling. I knew pollution even then.
How did you know that?
But I knew it wasn't natural, and I knew that they were joking about it. But it was that was the way it was considered to be. It was a necessary evil to earn a living.
You had said that you, as a child, you weren't so aware of animal rights, and I'm guessing that means conservation, river quality, and all sorts of things. How did you move into it as you grew older?
There was maturity, some natural maturity, but also getting involved with wilderness programs and the mentality about that. Getting to know that it was not just a pretty place to be, but it was something that really needed to be preserved. And I think it was by association, and it was an easy switch in mentality for me. It was a natural thing. It was kind of like an aha experience, but I had to be exposed to this. And again, maturation was part of this.
You said there was an aha moment. Was there a moment that you see as a tipping point in your life?
I think it was just a series of things, going back to remembering what the river was like when I was very young. Not only did we have the fish kills, but there were no eagles and no osprey that I remember. Today, we see them everywhere. It's beautiful. And the reason we had no eagles was because of DDT, which had gotten into the food chain. And what actually was happening was that it caused the eagle's eggs to be so fragile that when they landed in the nest, the eggs would break and the chicks would never hatch. And this was when all this was being found out. This is when they decided to discontinue the DDT programs. But in those days, the DDT trucks would come by the house spraying for mosquitoes. I mean, it was that prevalent. So those recollections and those experiences made it a fairly good, easy transition for me to go from being rather nonchalant about the environment to being a staunch protector of it.
How old were you when you were past the tipping point and into this new person, adult person?
I was evolving probably in my 20s by that time. And it was at an accelerating pace.
Once you started,
Yeah.
got more and more.
Yes.
Was there a particular person who stands out or stood out at the time for cleaning up the drains, or organization for that matter?
James River Association was there early on.
Do they go back to the Teton still?
I believe they do. I'm not sure exactly when they started. But they are still very active today. And on the heels of them were the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. And the James River, of course, is a major tributary to that. Right? And now, very happily, the Rice River Center, is a wonderful new partnership here in the effort to preserve the river and its environs.
And the Park Service has stepped in with the John Smith River Trail.
Yes,
which
yes,
brings more awareness to
all of that.
I've done it. I've driven for a couple of the stops, but it does bring another national light on the James River.
It does. It does. There, over the last 30 years or so, there has been an unbelievable increase in programs that promote awareness of a healthy environment.
And other than giving us an incredibly important interview, what are you involved in right now about preserving the river and valuing it and helping others learn how to appreciate it? What are you doing these days?
Well, I mentioned that I'm closely associated with the James River Association. And they have a program that is involved with their River Keepers program. It's called River Rats. And I'm a river rat. And we are trained to go out and observe and report what we see. And so that, and I have an adopted section of the river from Jordan Point down to Maycox Point that I patrol.
And does that include leaving where you have parents, haven't you?
Yes, it does. Not coincidentally.
I'm not familiar with Maycox.
Maycox Point is the point just downriver from Coggins Point.
Is that MACUS?
I believe so.
And how often do you go out and do your river rat duties?
Every time I'm out, really, I'm on patrol doing something. If nothing else, cleaning up the shore. I will go out alone or with my grandson, who is now 17, and between the two of us, we can bring back quite a boatload full of plastic and bottles and things like that.
And how often do you go out these days? Is it in a canoe, your sailcloth canoe that you go out?
Go out and I would say at least once a week. Sometimes twice a week, sometimes not, that type of thing. But there are factors involved in the weather, tides, other circumstances. But I like to get out every time I'm down here.
And does he usually go with you?
When he was younger, he did. He's a busy young man now.
Yeah. So that makes sense. Get
Yes.
really involved.
Yes, right.
Does he live close?
He does. He lives in Colonial Heights. And this cabin actually is a very special place to him as well. So he likes to come down and just spend time, sometimes spend nights, and that type of thing.
Is it right on the water?
It is overlooking the water. We're on a bluff, which is about 70 feet or so. It's not, we can't see the river during the summer because of foliage, but you can in the winter. We have old growth trees in front of us.
And how do you get down 70 feet?
We used to have a path. That was always the way to get down. But we have a neighbor now who actually has cut a little road to go down, so we use his road. And that's also how we get a boat up and down, a lot easier than carrying a canoe up a slippery path.
Yeah. Do you store the canoe down on the river?
I have a couple of canoes. The one that I use the most, I keep down near the river, in the woods, along with a couple of kayaks. And depending on hurricane situations or what I'm feeling up to at any given time, sometimes I'll bring them up to the cabin and store them for when I'm not using them, usually midwinter.
I was recently on Cedar Lake,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a whole industry of can builders
Mm-hmm.
who will go from the top of the bluff, little tramway, a little car that goes down to the water for you and your boats
Mm-hmm.
to get down there because there's a very high, about a similar bluff
Mm-hmm.
on the west side of the lake.
Mm-hmm.
People do anything to get down to the water. Huh.
Yes, they will. It's very important to have easy access.
Yes. What else would you say about the connection of you, your beliefs, your values, and the things of what stories have you not told us yet?
Well, I can go back a long way to our family has been in this immediate area for a couple of 100 years, since the late 1700s. And that's where the cabin is on part of that, actually. So this area actually is part of my root system. There were lots of generations before me that grew up here during all kinds of circumstances, including the Civil War, and lots of stories from those times. It's nice to be able to walk the land that my ancestors walked on.
And how are those stories preserved? How do you get to know what they are?
Some of them happen to be in history books or biographies. Some of it is passed down by word. Our family has a lot of historians in it, has had a lot of historians in it. Not actual ones, but family historians. And so the stories have always been there. And there was one in particular, his name was James Gillum. He was also a Ruffin, his mother was. And he's the one who taught me about his generation and the generations that he remembered before, including my grandfather.
And how are you preserving your life for future ancestors? How are you telling your story other than today, which is wonderful?
Collecting as much of the information as I can, and staying involved with other family members who are interested in our history.
Do you write journals or articles or collect photographs, or what do you actively do?
I've written an article or two that's been published about Edmund Ruffin, and he's a very controversial figure, a controversial figure. Right. I may have mentioned earlier, before we started filming, that he's known for a couple of important things. One is he was considered to be the father of modern agriculture. He lived right across the river, as I said, and did a lot of early experimentation for soil. One of the things was to dig out of the ground what was referred to as marl, M-A-R-L, which were ancient shells, which we have quite a few deposits of. And he discovered that when he applied the ground shells to the soil that was wearing out, that he could refurbish it basically by changing the pH back to where it would grow best. And he wrote quite a few journals himself. He was known throughout the South, really, as an agricultural soil expert. That was the good thing he did.
Before we did the good thing, was it just the pH, or was it also replenishing the minerals
I'm not really sure of all of the chemistry of it, but it was soil chemistry that he worked with, and I know that you can still. I know where some of the marl pits still are in the woods. You can still be found if you have the right map.
Let's see, these are shells, right?
Yes, they are ancient shells, fossilized shells. Mm-hmm.
And shells of what?
I think scallop shells are one of the most frequent ones that you can, and actually you can find them on the beach when the tide goes out. There are quite a few different kinds, but scallops of different sizes. Some of them are gigantic, like I would have to hold them, maybe in two hands. They can be that big. But there were quite a lot of them, and they could be found kind of in deposits. And once he found those, he used his labor force, otherwise known as slaves, to dig them out. And I understand that this was one of the least favorite jobs of the slaves, because it was such hard work to dig through root systems and things like that to get it out, put it on wagons, and have it ground up, and then put it out in precise ways.
I know, heavy too.
Yes, they were heavy, and it was, as I said, it was something that they would rather not be doing.
And these marl pits are back in on the land, they're not right on the river?
The ones that I know of were back off the land a little bit. What's that?
Get there.
How did the deposits get there? I'm not sure exactly how they got there, but we know that the sea was here millions of years ago. We're talking about millions of years now. So it was an entirely different era.
Forgive my ignorance, but scallop shells currently on the shore of the James River?
I don't think so. They are saltwater. Right. So we don't have that kind of mollusk here.
But I thought you said you could find them on the shore of the James.
You can, but they are being uncovered. They were actually from millions of years ago. They come out of the bank, let's say, so these. You can also find shark's teeth from millions of years ago here. And I forgot to tell you, that was one of our major activities, was to go down to the shore and spend quite a few hours, very pleasant hours, sitting and finding shark's teeth, usually with a friend or two, or a group of us would be down there. And we have hundreds of them that we found over the years. And the interesting thing is that there seems to be about as many now as there were when I was young and when my mother was there. Looking for them. It always seems to be about the same amount. You find about one a minute.
And I think I heard you say that you have a collection in your cabin?
I do. I have a collection of fossils, including whale vertebra, shark's teeth, and different size shells and different kinds of shells. And these are all ancient ones too.
Well, this is certainly part of your contribution to telling your story about this area and your connection to it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It's very rich. It is. And as I speak, these memories start coming up. That I maybe would have forgotten to tell you without this flow of conversation.
So tell me what you haven't yet said before we get to the downside.
Of Edmund.
What memories have come up that you haven't talked about yet?
Shooting 22 rifles was also something that my father was a marksman in the Army, and he was also a very good instructor about how to shoot these things. So one of the activities was to put up targets. I hate to say it, sometimes throw bottles out and shoot them. Again, these were the days when we didn't know any better. That's what everybody did. I do spend some time on very low tides now and find broken glass and pick it up and get it out of there.
That's good.
Right. But shooting shotguns and rifles and pistols was just another activity that we did when we got down to our cabin, which we refer to as the bungalow, actually.
So tell us about your experience with Camp Orlando.
Camp Wyandotte, YMCA camp, based out of Richmond. A neighbor, a contemporary of mine who lived across the street, Carl Heckel, had been working as the aquatic director for a year or two before me. And he and I were talking one day. He was leaving, and I was available, and he suggested that I apply for this position. Carl was also familiar with the bungalow here on the river. So I did, and was accepted as the aquatic director. And that was when I got an opportunity to use a lot of the skills that I had developed over the years. I was about 23, 24 at the time. And I had also worked with kids at the YMCA as a swimming instructor and this type of thing. So I had a background in teaching kids aquatics. And there was a lot of aquatics being taught here. Canoeing, of course. They had some little kayaks. They had sailboats, small little sailboats, which are styrofoam, but they sail quite nicely. And that's when my sailing skills came in. I knew how to do that. Even though there was an actual instructor for sailing, my job was to make sure that it was being done safely and correctly. And it was nice to have those skills. There was also a little machine on a pond, which is no longer here because it was a dammed up pond, called the skidoodler. And basically it was a contraption with two arms on it, long arms on it. And from the ends of those arms was a ski rope. And we could teach kids. It had an outboard motor close to the center of it. And it would just go around and round and pull these kids up. You had to be rather light to do that. And teach them to water ski without using a boat. It was safer, for one thing. They were not on the open water. So that was another activity we had here. Of course, a very nice swimming pool. And so swimming lessons were taught here.
Did you ever teach them to swim in the river?
Nope. No, the river was considered to, we didn't actually have them swim in the river. We were boating in the river. Mm-hmm. But again, those were the days when the river was not as clean as it is today. And it's open water and not as easily controlled, as far as having preteens swimming in the river. Mm-hmm. So we kept it safer and kept their swimming activities in the pool.
Did they swim in the lake that was here at all, or was that just the water?
That was mainly there was a fishing place. That was another activity we had. And the opportunity for them to learn how to ski with the skidoodler.
Was it dangerous to swim in the dams at that point? Would it make it actively sick?
I don't think so, but I think the main reason was it was just not a good idea to have a bunch of kids swimming in the river who you didn't know exactly their swimming skills.
And there is a current.
And there is a current. And it is dark. If they went down, it'd be hard to find them. So we kept them out of the river, except when they were in a boat where we could see them better. There was also horses here. there was a horseback riding program, and I accidentally got into that. I'd had experiences with horses before. I owned horses and taught horsemanship. And that was run by what they call a wrangler. And the wrangler had to leave in the middle of the season, in the middle of the summer for some reason. And so the director of the camp, John A. Lyles, recruited me into that position as well. And so I was kind of going back and forth between being a lifeguard sometimes and overseeing the aquatic program and making sure the horse program was also being done in a safe manner.
Is this why you only do it one year?
I graduated from college that year. The other thing that was happening, I was finishing my last 2 courses at VCU. I'm an alum at VCU. And so after that, I was a free person.
Did you go to work?
I moved to Florida for a while and was involved in treasure salvage hunting, which is a whole nother story.
That's pretty far away.
It's far away, but I'll tell you, there is a closer experience when I first learned to scuba dive. There wasn't a lot of places to scuba dive. And a friend of mine who lived in the property close to right next to the cabin, he and I became friends, Steve Doherty. And we would go out in his father's boat with my scuba gear and anchor in the channel. Right here, right out here, I can point to right where it is. And wait for a slack tide. And we would take turns going down to the bottom of the channel, 35 feet, let's say, into total darkness, making sure we didn't let go of the anchor line. And we had another little signal where, another little rope that we would take down that the person topside would jerk on if a large boat was sighted, because we had to get out of there when a ship was coming, because we were right in the middle of this channel. These are things that young men do. And one of the things I remember about it, other than the fact that you could see nothing, it was just total darkness. It was the first time in my life I'd been in a situation like that. I had been used to a muddy bottom all my life down here. Anytime we stepped out of the boat, it was into mud. But that was not the case in the channel. It was mud-free, and we actually had some large rocks down there. One, I remember, I was able to sit on. It was a boulder. I'll never forget it. And I couldn't see it, but I landed on it. And these were the kinds of things that as I said, young men will do.
So I'm guessing that it was the excitement and the challenge of getting to the bottom that led to this endeavor?
The unique experience of being able to breathe underwater.
In the dark.
In the dark. In the dark, yes.
Was this kind of a coming of age to prove your courage?
I think it was just more of, I had the gear, I had nowhere else to go. I had someone to do it with. We had the boat, and why not try it? The only water we had that had any depth also had no visibility. We had to live with that. And it was just an experiment to test the gear out and that type of thing. It was, thinking back on it, it wasn't all that dangerous.
Okay.
Yeah, I know it's an opinion, but we had our safety systems kind of in line, in place. One of the other memories I had was that Steve and I would water ski around, and often we would wait for a ship to come up that was throwing a big wake, and we would get behind this ship and use the wake as kind of a ramp to ski over. And that was exciting as well, because we had to be pretty close to that big ship to get a nice big wake like that.
And if they could even see it, how did the ship captains feel about you playing in the lake close to the boat?
They probably weren't happy about it. If they, I'm not even sure if they could see us, because by the time we were actually doing this, the ship had passed us, and we were just in the wake, maybe a couple of 100 feet behind it, not far.
They would try to call or something and say you're right?
I never did that, but there is another person that you may be interviewing. His name is Jim Enochs, who still lives here on the bay, who can tell you stories about when he and his friends would paddle up to the back of a barge that was being pulled in those days by a tugboat, and ride down to Norfolk and then catch another one on the way back.
We did interview him, and that's what was in my mind.
Okay. Well,
Although a big ship is slightly different from a boat.
that's right,
Easier.
right. But, Jim was about a half a generation ahead of me, so he had some other types of experiences in earlier times as well. But I do remember those tugboats, and he may have told you this too, is that up until probably sometime in the 60s, the tugboats used to actually go up Powell's Creek, which is the creek just downriver from Coggins Point. And there, you can see barges up there, abandoned barges up there today, and there was a gravel pit up there. And they would load up with gravel and turn around and come out of there. And I remember being in a canoe in Powell's Creek, looking up and seeing this tugboat pushing a barge in a relatively small creek. Right. They were going, but they did it on a regular basis. And the remnants of that activity is still there, and you have to be careful, because some of those abandoned barges are only half sunk, and are just under the water. And if you don't know exactly where they are, you can hit them with your propeller. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that area is up there.
Did you evolve into motor-driven boats?
Yes. When I was about 12, a fishing boat, an old-fashioned fishing boat, drifted up. We had no identification on it. Had gotten loose somewhere and drifted onto our beach. And my father had a 5-horsepower Johnson outboard. So I used that 5-horsepower Johnson outboard, which he had used on the canoe. You can actually put an outboard on the canoe with a little attachment. And that was when I kind of cut my teeth on power boats. We didn't go fast. It was a big, heavy boat with a very small engine. But I considered it to be better than paddling at the time. Yeah. It was a nice addition to the fleet.
One kind of technical question, you referred to a cabin as a bungalow.
Yes.
Does that mean it was arts and crafts architecture?
It is a Lincoln log type of architecture. The history of that was when my grandfather decided to have it built. I don't know all of the circumstances, but I do know that a lot of the logs were brought in by a shallow draft skiff and unloaded on the property next to where the bungalow is, to wagons that were pulled by mules. And that's how the logs got to the site.
You didn't have enough timber on your own property to cut?
Well, there were enough of them. This is a pretty big place, and there were enough of them, so they had to be brought in because they had to be uniform. So the place was built apparently over a summer by a crew of carpenters in the summer of 1916.
And we need to wrap up and meet Catherine on the.
Okay.
But tell us briefly about if you'd like, the downside of your relative, and then the wrap-up statement.
Well, whether it's a downside or not depends on who you're talking to. But he was referred to as one of the fire eaters of the Southern gentry who were instrumental in fanning the flames of getting the Civil War started. He was quite well known, and he was known in Charleston, South Carolina, where he was actually visiting during the firing of Fort Sumter, and was given the honor, so to speak, of firing the first shot on Fort Sumter. So he's quite famous for that procedure. Now, if you go down to Charleston, they'll say, well, he may not have fired the first shot. There are other people who may have fired the first shot, and whether it was the first shot onto Fort Sumter or whether it was a signal shot to commence firing, we don't know. But he was there, and as a civilian, he was a quasi-civilian. They actually made him an honorary soldier in the Palmetto Guards there. And there are pictures of him in his uniform and his musket that are in history books. But he was right here, and after it turned out, I think he was very sorry about this afterwards, because things didn't go well for him, because once the war started, it was right in his backyard, quite literally. These soldiers were camped right at Beechwood, which is the house that his son Edmund Jr. was living in, and that Edmund himself spent a lot of time in. And they were camped in the yard, and they almost destroyed the structure. And so that happened, with a few hundred yards away from where the cabin, our bungalow is today.
But your bungalow wasn't threatened?
Our bungalow wasn't built yet.
Oh, of course.
Right.
Well, slip of the dates.
Right, huh? Right. But actually, he became a fugitive in his own land within a year of the beginning of that war that he helped to start. He had no peace after that, because the federal troops were everywhere, including probably about where we were sitting. They were definitely at Berkeley. During the war, as I said, he fired the first shot, but there were other shots that he was allowed to fire. At Bull Run, he followed the troops up to Bull Run, and they allowed him to fire some cannons up there at a place called Little Bridge. So he kind of was, in those days, was able to just kind of go with the troops as an elderly man, 60-something years old.
Obviously a major celebrity.
Major celebrity. There was a military function for a Confederate one that was designed to bombard the Federal ships on this side in about 1862, I think. And it was off on his land, so he decided to go with them. But and he wanted to fire cannons there, but it was kind of a touchy situation where they had to put their cannons in place. The Confederates did fire a certain number of shots and get off of that peninsula before they could be cut off. Mm-hmm. So they made him very unhappy by kind of ignoring him and telling him, no, we don't have time for you to fire any guns. We have to do this ourselves and get out of here. But he was that close to the war to be actually to be part of the war.
Well, if we could do a big shift here, back to how you would wrap up how your love of the river and your association with it impacted your life, what you want for its future. How would you wrap up this, thinking about the James River in your life?
Well, as you can surmise from the conversation, the river, especially this particular part of the river, of the Lower James, is an extremely important part of my life from my earliest recollections. And I have seen it go from almost a dead river with all of the fish kills and very, very little wildlife. There wasn't even a lot of deer in those days, or turkey, or anything like that. To it coming back, it's not a pristine river, but it has come back so far to a very viable river, and that has given me a lot of joy. I didn't think it would happen. When I was a teenager and in my early 20s, I pretty much took those circumstances as a given, and there was nothing I could do about it, and there was nothing in place to stop it. The EPA had not even been invented yet. And then suddenly, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, the EPA came in, and again, depending on the politics of the day, the EPA has different roles. But I think what has made some of the major differences were the organizations that were formed to protect the James and the Chesapeake Bay, James River Association, Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and I think that one of the crown jewels is the most recent one, and that's this Rice Rivers Association, or Rice Rivers Program. They're still new, but the work that they're doing and have planned is going to be extremely significant in keeping this river viable. One of the Rice Rivers project is education. Starting with kids as young as kindergarten. They invite field trips out for schools to introduce them to the concept of how special the river and the land around the river is important to them. And they continue on with college level courses and graduate level programs, environmental studies and that type of thing. And that's what it's going to take. That's what was not in place when I was when I was young, even when I was at VCU. But that is the trend today. And I can't be more excited about it.